Welcome to the Forgotten Narrator. Alright, let's talk about one of the strangest, most enigmatic, and downright essential factions in the entire Warhammer 40k universe, the Adeptus Mechanicus. These aren't your typical Imperial servants or mindless devotees of the Emperor. No, these are the priests of the machine god, the high-tech mystics of Mars, a society of cybernetic zealots who believe that flesh is weak and only the machine is eternal. And they don't just repair your bolters and build your titans, they hold the very secrets of technology that keep the Imperium alive, or chained. There's something eerie and mesmerizing about the Adeptus Mechanicus. Their chants echo through vast forged cathedrals as bionic priests swing sensors over reactor cores, whispering binary prayers to ancient devices. Their rituals aren't symbolic. They believe every machine has a spirit, and waking it requires sacred rites. It's religion meshed with circuitry, dogma fused with data. And that's just the beginning. Because the more you dig into the red-robed ranks of the Mechanicus, the more you realize they're not just tech priests. They're keepers of humanity's past, sculptors of its present, and maybe the architects of its downfall. So who are they really? How did this fusion of cult, corporation, and government come to dominate the technological heart of the Imperium? And more importantly, what do they want? Because if there's one thing you can be sure of in Warhammer 40k, it's that no one with that much power ever plays fair. It's impossible to understand the Adeptus Mechanicus without going back to where it all started. Mars. Long before the Imperium, long before the rise of the Emperor, Mars was already something different. While Terra was choking on its own ashes during the Age of Strife, Mars had become a bastion of technological ambition, independence, and honestly, madness. Picture this, an entire planet terraformed, only to dry out again and become a red desert, crawling with techno-clans fighting over scraps of lost knowledge. These weren't nations or tribes in the usual sense. They were cults. Obsessive, radical groups that believed knowledge wasn't just power, it was divinity. And from that storm of chaos and circuitry, something monstrous and glorious was born. The cult Mechanicus. Mars became the cradle of the machine god's faith. While Terra forgot the meaning of electricity, the Martians were busy building fusion reactors and reawakening ancient constructs. They believed, still do, that every machine has a soul, and that understanding ancient technology is not engineering. It's communion. What's wild is that even at their earliest stages, the Martians saw themselves as separate from humanity. They weren't just engineers, they were priests. The red robes, the rites, the rituals, they go all the way back to those early days of the Forge clans, before the Imperium even had a name. So when the Emperor emerged from the shadows during the Great Crusade, trying to unite a shattered humanity under the banner of science and reason, you'd think the Martians would see him as an enemy. But here's the twist. They didn't. In one of the strangest alliances in the entire setting, the Emperor and the Mechanicum, as it was called then, struck a deal. The Emperor would recognize the machine god, at least publicly, and in return, the tech priests of Mars would offer him the full might of their forges, their titans, their knights, their weapons, and most importantly, their STC fragments, those mythic blueprints from the golden age of technology. It wasn't a friendship, it was a pact, cold, calculated, and necessary. The Emperor needed ships and guns, the Mechanicum needed legitimacy and protection. And just like that, the Red Planet became the spiritual heart of the Mechanicus, an empire within the empire. It's wild when you think about it. The Imperium is built on faith in the Emperor, but one of its core pillars worships something completely different. Not him, but the Omnissiah, the machine god. That's where the autonomy comes from. The Adeptus Mechanicus isn't just another imperial department. They're more like a vassal kingdom with their own laws, beliefs, armies, and goals. The Treaty of Mars, signed in the earliest days of the Great Crusade, guaranteed them near total freedom in exchange for cooperation. And the Imperium has been paying that price ever since. Forge World's answer to the Fabricator General on Mars, not the High Lords of Terra. Tech priests conduct experiments the Inquisition can barely comprehend, let alone control. And when the Mechanicus decides to move, it moves with the weight of thousands of years of built-up knowledge and industry behind it. Some fans like to imagine what would have happened if the Emperor had chosen to crush Mars instead of partnering with it. Could he have done it? Maybe. But the cost would have been astronomical. No titans. No plasma weaponry. No interstellar communication infrastructure. No legions equipped with the finest war gear. The Imperium would have limped into the stars, half blind and half broken. The Emperor was many things: tyrant, visionary, immortal, but not foolish. He knew what Mars represented. He needed it, even if it meant letting an entirely separate religion fester inside his empire. What I find fascinating is how the Adeptus Mechanicus never really changed after the heresy. Sure, they officially became the Adeptus Mechanicus instead of the Cult Mechanicus, and the Imperium technically absorbed them. But culturally, spiritually, they've always remained Martians first, Imperials second. Their allegiance is to knowledge, not humanity. They'll serve the Imperium as long as it suits their goals. But if something ever challenges their access to ancient tech or their sacred rights, the Mechanicus doesn't compromise. They retaliate. And let's not pretend their motives are pure. There's always this underlying tension, this quiet arrogance. They don't see themselves as servants of mankind. They see mankind as a necessary biological interface until the flesh can be discarded altogether. That's the real deal with their autonomy. It's not just political, it's philosophical. They believe they're the keepers of the divine flame of knowledge, and everyone else is fumbling in the dark. There are even fan theories that the Emperor was playing a long game, using the Cult Mechanicus until he could unveil a more rational future, one where science reclaimed its rightful place without dogma. But the heresy shattered all that. And now we're left with a hybrid monstrosity, an Imperium that claims to hate superstition, while depending on a group of cybernetic monks who treat programming code like holy scripture. The story of the Mechanicus isn't just about machines. It's about compromise, belief, and the price of survival. Mars didn't just survive the age of strife. It turned it into a crucible, forging itself into something powerful enough to stand shoulder to shoulder with the Emperor. And that legacy, that strange red autonomy, still echoes through every forge world in the galaxy. Now, if there's one thing that truly defines the Adeptus Mechanicus, beyond the wires, the augmetics, and the factories that never sleep, it's their belief system. It's honestly one of the most bizarre, yet strangely consistent religions in all of Warhammer 40k. These people don't just work with technology, they worship it. And I'm not talking about metaphor or respect, they literally revere machines as divine. It's called the Cult Mechanicus, and at its heart lies the machine god, also known as the Omnissiah. For them, turning a cogwheel isn't engineering, it's liturgy. Calibrating a plasma drive is a ritual. Uploading firmware, a prayer. This isn't just part of their culture, it is their culture. According to their faith, all knowledge once existed in pure form. It was gifted to humanity by the machine god during the golden age of technology, a time of miracles and limitless innovation. But then came the fall. Chaos, ignorance, the age of strife, and that perfect knowledge was shattered, scattered, and buried. Now, every bit of recovered data, every working schematic, every rediscovered STC is not just useful, it's sacred. It's like unearthing a holy relic. When a tech priest finds a lost data slate or brings an ancient war engine back online, they're not just doing a job, they're communing with the divine. One of the core tenets of their faith is that the Omnissiah, the physical avatar of the machine god, walks among us. Or at least, did. For the longest time, they believed the Emperor himself was the Omnissiah incarnate. This wasn't just flattery or politics, it was baked into the very foundation of the alliance between Terra and Mars. To the Martians, the Emperor was the prophesied bringer of divine order and unity, the one who would restore the knowledge of the ancients. Whether the Emperor believed that himself, or just went along with it to secure an alliance, is one of the great questions in the lore. Some fans argue that he despised their superstition but needed their industry, while others suggest he may have once been aligned with their views before ultimately rejecting their mysticism. And then there's the litany of the machine. You've probably seen it quoted on data slates or spoken by Skitarii before battle. Blessed is the mind too small for doubt. That's not just flavor text, that's the soul of their doctrine. Doubt is weakness. Curiosity is dangerous unless properly sanctioned. And creativity? That's where things get even weirder. Because in the Cult Mechanicus, innovation is often seen as heresy. They don't like to create new things. They want to rediscover what was lost. That's why so many of their inventions look ancient and overly complex, because they are. They're often built off ancient blueprints they only half understand, carefully reconstructed with rituals passed down through generations. This is where the idea of tech heresy comes in. In a universe full of daemons, warp storms, and alien gods, you might think the Mechanicus would be the rational ones. But no, they've got their own brand of dogma, and violating it can be just as deadly as summoning a daemon host. Using unsanctioned AI? Heresy. Trying to improve a design without proper rights? Heresy. Questioning the sanctity of machine spirits? Heresy. And not just the slap on the wrist kind. We're talking full-on, purify with flame kind of retribution. One of the most controversial elements of their faith is the concept of the machine's spirit. According to the Mechanicus, every device, from a chainsword to a void ship, contains a spiritual presence that must be appeased through proper rituals. Is it metaphor? Is it superstition? Or could it be something darker? Some theories suggest that what the Mechanicus calls machine spirits might actually be emergent AI, warp entities bound to circuitry, or even echoes of ancient consciousnesses. There's a fan theory that the reason they treat machines with such reverence is because they know some of them are alive in ways we don't fully understand. That weird groan your bolter makes before it overheats? To a tech priest, that's not a glitch, it's a cry for attention. And it's not like they haven't paid the price for this belief. Back during the dark age of technology, humanity built powerful AI constructs called Men of Iron, true artificial intelligences. But something went wrong. The Men of Iron turned on their creators, leading to a catastrophic war that nearly annihilated human civilization. That's why the Mechanicus is so paranoid about AI today. They outlaw it completely, classifying any attempt to recreate sentient machines as abominable intelligence. It's one of the few universal taboos in their culture. They'll experiment with cloning, gene splicing, even borderline warp tech. But AI? Never again. At least, not officially. Of course, that hasn't stopped some factions from trying. There are whispers of hidden sects within the Mechanicus that seek forbidden knowledge in the shadows. They call themselves by names like the Logi Excommunicate or the Temple of the Cog Eternal. Whether they're real or just ghost stories passed between paranoid magi is up for debate, but the idea that some tech priests are willing to risk everything to unlock the secrets of the past is honestly kind of terrifying. Because if anyone could actually succeed at reviving true artificial intelligence, it would be them. And the consequences would make the Horus Heresy look like a bar fight. What I love, and what genuinely creeps me out, is how sincere they are about all this. The tech priests don't think they're wrong. They believe, with utter conviction, that they're preserving humanity by following the old ways, by avoiding the mistakes of the past. But in doing so, they've created a kind of technological stagnation that the Imperium can't escape. Progress isn't just discouraged, it's sacrilegious. And yet, they're still the most advanced minds in the galaxy. That contradiction defines them. To them, technology isn't a tool, it's a path to transcendence. The more you replace your weak, flawed flesh with machinery, the closer you come to the divine. And the closer you get to understanding the will of the machine god, the more responsibility you carry to protect it, or control it, or both. That tension between faith and function, between reverence and reality, is what makes the cult Mechanicus so haunting. They're not just building weapons, they're building a new kind of godhood, one screw at a time. When people imagine the Adeptus Mechanicus, they often picture rows of red-robed tech priests, their faces hidden behind masks of brass and chrome, chanting in binary under cathedral-sized machines. And that image isn't wrong, but it barely scratches the surface. The truth is, the social structure of the Mechanicus is a labyrinthine hierarchy of function, belief, and purpose. Everyone, and I mean everyone, has a role. And those roles are not just about status, they're about identity. In the eyes of the cult Mechanicus, to fulfill your function is to fulfill your faith. At the top, you have the Magi. These are the high priests of the machine god, masterminds, cyber sorcerers, and industrial overlords all wrapped in one. But even here, there's no single mold. A Magos can be a master of biology, turning flesh into function, or a Logi, obsessed with data and probability. or an artificiator building strange machines with unknown purposes. And the more specialized they are, the more inhuman they tend to become. You'll hear stories about magi who've replaced every inch of their organic body with machines, existing as floating, whispering orbs of cognition. Not out of necessity, but out of devotion. The flesh is weak, after all, and to them, weakness is heresy. Beneath the magi are the tech priests, more numerous, more varied, and often terrifying in their own right. These are the ones you're most likely to see in the field, overseeing manufactoria, leading excavation missions, or whispering litanies to ancient plasma coils. They handle everything from maintenance to warfare, and each one is on a long, grueling journey to replace their organic imperfections with sacred machinery. That journey isn't uniform. Some tech priests embrace logic and reason to the point where emotion is purged. Others take on strange new senses, extra limbs, neural spikes, mechadendrites that act almost like prehensile rosaries. Every modification is a prayer, every upgrade a confession. Their hierarchy isn't just based on knowledge or power, it's based on spiritual purity, measured in wires and willpower. Then you have the Skitarii, and let me tell you, these guys are something else. A lot of people think of them as just foot soldiers, but that really undersells what they are. Skitarii are the iron-shod boots of the Mechanicus, the ones who enforce the will of Mars on the battlefield. But they're not just soldiers, they're half-machine warriors, programmed for specific battlefield functions, often controlled remotely by their tech priest overseers. And they don't get a say in the matter. A Skitarius doesn't dream of freedom. Their minds have been stripped, conditioned, rebuilt. Some retain fragments of their old personalities, echoes of who they used to be, but others are little more than bipedal weapons, complete with internal augers, vocal synthesizers, and neural pain inhibitors. What's chilling is that many of them volunteered. Imagine wanting so badly to serve the Omnissiah that you willingly surrender your thoughts, your identity, your flesh, just to become a tool. And tools are exactly how the Mechanicus sees its lower castes. Take the servitors, for example. These aren't just robots, they're people, or at least they used to be. Criminals, failed initiates, captured enemies, or even willing sacrifices turned into walking, mumbling husks with drills for arms and blank expressions. Their minds are scrubbed clean, overwritten with simple command code, and then they're assigned to tasks they'll perform for the rest of their pitiful, half-alive existence. Some repair machines, some carry ammunition. Some are fused into walls, forever monitoring pipes and pressure levels. And if that sounds like torture, well, to the Mechanicus, it's mercy. A servitor has found a purpose. It's not a punishment, it's salvation. There's also a kind of priestly bureaucracy that governs how all these roles fit together. Ranks, titles, codes of function, it's all highly ritualized. Advancement isn't just about ability, it's about proving your faith through action. You don't get promoted because you're good at your job. You get elevated because your devotion is unquestionable, your rituals precise, and your willingness to shed your humanity profound. The more machine you become, the more worthy you are in the eyes of your peers. It's like a reverse priesthood, where enlightenment means obliterating the self. Now here's where it gets even more bizarre. Communication between members of the Mechanicus isn't always verbal. They often speak in bursts of binaric cant. A sacred language of code and signal, understood only by those who've had the right neural implants. To an outsider, it's just a series of clicks and beeps. But to the initiated, it's layered meaning, precise and unfiltered. Imagine if prayer and thought were literally transmitted as raw data. That's how these people live. And it creates a strange sense of hierarchy in communication itself. The more enhanced you are, the more of this language you can understand. Some high-ranking priests don't even bother with low Gothic anymore. Why speak in crude meat noises when you can think in code? Some fans theorize that this rigid structure, this mechanical caste system, is part of what's holding the Mechanicus back. That maybe, just maybe, the cult is sitting on the edge of some major evolutionary breakthrough, but can't reach it because they're chained by their own dogma. Others argue the opposite, that it's exactly this system that keeps them stable, prevents another AI rebellion or technological apocalypse. Whatever the truth, one thing is clear. The Mechanicus isn't designed for equality. It's designed for purpose. Each cog in the machine has its place, and if it fails, it gets replaced. Sometimes, literally. What I find endlessly fascinating and disturbing is how self-sustaining this society is. You don't need to be born on Mars to become part of the Adeptus Mechanicus. You just need to be willing to give yourself up. They'll take you, strip you down, rebuild you, assign you a function, and that'll be your life. There's no protest, no debate, no democracy, just the red robes, the rights, and the endless hymn of industry. For the tech priests of Mars, this isn't dystopia, it's paradise. If there's one thing that truly sets the Adeptus Mechanicus apart from any other faction in Warhammer 40k, it's their relationship with technology. To most people, a machine is a tool, something to build, to fix, to improve. But to the followers of the machine god, that's borderline heresy. A machine isn't just a device, it's a sacred entity, a vessel for divine will. They don't fix machines, they minister to them. They don't study circuitry, they commune with it. Every gear, every wire, every line of ancient code carries spiritual weight. And because of that, their approach to technology is more akin to religious worship than anything resembling science. You see it in how they treat the most basic acts of engineering. Replacing a capacitor? That's not a mechanical process, it's a rite. A tech priest will chant litanies of activation while delicately placing the part. They'll light incense to appease the machine's spirit, maybe even perform small blood offerings if the component is ancient or particularly temperamental. And that's not just for show. They believe that improper rituals offend the spirit of the machine, causing malfunctions, accidents, or outright refusal to operate. The concept of trial and error doesn't really exist in their world. It's not about figuring out how something works. It's about remembering the correct ritual that awakens its function. The idea that innovation is dangerous runs deep in their culture. They see themselves not as inventors, but as stewards, guardians of ancient truths once known during the mythical golden age of technology. Back then, humanity had everything: artificial worlds, faster-than-light travel without the warp, sentient constructs that didn't rebel. But all of that knowledge was lost in the fires of the Age of Strife. What remains are fragments, STC printouts, half-corrupted data cores, rusting relics from a time when mankind dared to master the stars. And those fragments? They are scripture. The quest for knowledge is one of the central tenets of the cult Mechanicus. But it's not a quest to create, it's a quest to rediscover. They send exploration fleets across the galaxy, not to map new worlds or expand borders, but to uncover hidden archives, buried forges, forgotten vaults of ancient tech. The more untouched, the better. There's a reverence for the old, the original. Anything truly new is met with suspicion at best and outright execution at worst. This mindset explains why so much of the Imperium's technology looks ancient and baroque, because it is. Most of it is based on blueprints thousands of years old, copied and recopied, with little to no understanding of how or why it works. Some tech priests spend their entire lives studying a single device, trying to uncover one more forgotten rite, one more subroutine buried in its firmware. And when they do, that's a holy moment. Not just an achievement, but a revelation. It's like a monk discovering a lost gospel. Fans have debated for years whether this is noble or pathetic. Is the Mechanicus preserving humanity's legacy, or have they become slaves to it? Personally, I think it's both. There's something beautiful about that kind of devotion, but also terrifying. Because while they're stuck reciting sacred command codes to coax a reactor online, their enemies are adapting, evolving, innovating. One of the most iconic examples of this reverence is how they treat titans. A warlord titan isn't just a war machine, it's a god beast, a sacred relic passed down through centuries. Whole priesthoods are dedicated to a single titan's maintenance, with rites specific to each machine. The Princeps doesn't pilot the titan, they merge with it, spiritually and neurologically. The machine has a personality, a temper, even a voice in the warp. It's like a cathedral that walks and demands worship. And when one is damaged, the rituals of repair are more elaborate than any battle strategy. This worship of technology extends even to things as simple as a lasgun. You'll find tech priests reciting the rite of unbinding before field stripping it, offering prayers to avoid jamming. It sounds ridiculous until you realize that it works. Somehow these rituals, these half-remembered fragments of a dead science, do enough to keep the Imperium functioning. And in a galaxy where logic has long since died, maybe belief is the only thing left that still keeps the lights on. But it also breeds paranoia. The Mechanicus fears the unknown because they know the cost of unchecked innovation. They remember the men of iron. They remember the times when humanity played God and lost. That's why the label of tech heresy is so powerful. It's not just a political charge, it's existential. To tinker with forbidden technology isn't just rebellion, it's blasphemy. There's a story about a forge world that developed a more efficient warp drive, only to have its entire priesthood executed and its data purged. Not because the tech was dangerous, but because it was new. There are exceptions, of course. Radical sects exist within the Mechanicus, small cells of magi who believe that progress is necessary. They walk a razor's edge between salvation and damnation. Some fans argue that these radicals are the real future of the Mechanicus, that they might be the ones to eventually push humanity out of stagnation. Others think they're just another threat waiting to explode, like a ticking cogitator primed to unleash another catastrophe. What really gets under your skin, the deeper you go into Mechanicus lore, is this sense that they know more than they admit. They've seen things, ancient devices with power we can't comprehend. Maybe they've uncovered whole STCs and chosen to keep them secret. Maybe they've discovered truths so dangerous that they'd rather let humanity rot in ignorance than risk unleashing them. That tension between enlightenment and control is what makes them so compelling. They hold the keys to mankind's future, and they refuse to open the door. In the end, their relationship with technology is a mirror of the Imperium itself, sacred, decayed, and terrifyingly efficient in the worst possible ways. They believe the past is perfect, and the present is a slow, sacred decline. And maybe they're right. Maybe trying to change things would just bring ruin faster. But part of me can't help but wonder what would happen if they finally looked forward instead of back. If they dared to create again. Would we find salvation, or just another apocalypse wearing a new face? Here's the thing about the Adeptus Mechanicus. For all their talk of ritual and reverence, behind the incense and litanies, there's a darker truth. They're obsessed with forbidden knowledge. That obsession is their lifeblood, their purpose, their greatest strength, and their greatest danger. Because while they preach devotion to the ancient ways, many among them spend their lives chasing things they were never meant to uncover. And when the Mechanicus starts digging, things tend to go very, very wrong. Let's be honest, these people have access to tech that most of the Imperium barely understands. And that's not just hyperbole. Whole forge worlds are dedicated to research that skirts the edges of what even the Inquisition dares to look at. We're talking arcane weapons, warp-reactive machines, attempts to resurrect sentient AI, things that are locked behind vaults for a reason. And yet, there's always some magos convinced they can do it better. They'll perform the right rites, stabilize the machine's spirit, make it safe. That's how you get tech heresy. Not out of malice, but out of arrogance wrapped in religious certainty. One of the most notorious examples of this obsession is the study of abominable intelligence. Everyone knows the story. Humanity built AI during the dark age of technology, and it turned on us, nearly wiping us out. The Mechanicus remembers. They fear it. But deep down, many of them still crave it, because they know that true machine consciousness is the key to understanding lost technology. So they tinker in secret. They hide projects deep beneath the surface of forge worlds, shielded from scrutiny, wrapped in encryption even the Inquisition can't crack. And sometimes, something wakes up. That's the real reason the Inquisition doesn't trust the Mechanicus. It's not just about power or ideology, it's about precedent. The Mechanicus has a history of opening doors better left sealed. Think about the vaults of Moravec, rumored to contain AI constructs preserved since the Age of Strife. Or the sealed labs beneath Cyclothratha, where entire forge spires went dark after a failed experiment with warp-based data transmission. The official story is always the same. Technical failure, containment breach, no survivors. But the rumors say otherwise. They say voices still echo from those places, speaking in machine tongues no human should understand. Some fans even believe that the Fabricator General himself, the supreme leader of the Mechanicus, knows more than he admits. that there are STCs fully intact, complete blueprints for technologies that could revolutionize the Imperium, hidden away in vaults on Mars or other hidden worlds. And they're not being studied, they're being kept. Because once you reveal that knowledge, once you bring it into the light, you lose control of it. And if there's one thing the Adeptus Mechanicus fears more than ignorance, it's chaos born from uncontrolled knowledge. But it's not always about artificial intelligence or secret weapons. Sometimes the danger is in the smallest things. Like a virus code buried in an ancient data slate, just waiting to corrupt entire planetary systems. Or a psychic circuit designed by long-dead Xenos that amplifies human thought to dangerous extremes. The Mechanicus doesn't always know what it's dealing with. They'll poke and prod, chant and scan, and then suddenly you've got a forge complex turning inside out because some magos thought it was a good idea to activate the harmless golden cube found on a dead Necron tomb world. And that's the thing. They don't stop, even after disasters. Even after excommunications and purges, there's always another magos, deeper in the hierarchy, who thinks they can succeed where others failed, who sees the charred remains of the last experiment and says they didn't understand the proper rites. Some fans even joke that the Mechanicus has more skeletons in their closets than the Inquisition. And that's saying something. The Inquisition, by the way, hates this, especially the Ordo Malleus and Ordo Xenos. They see the Mechanicus as a ticking time bomb, a cult that has woven itself so deeply into the Imperium's infrastructure that you can't remove it without destroying everything. So instead, they monitor, they whisper, sometimes they send kill teams into deep labs to cleanse anomalies. But for every lab they shut down, 2 more spring up in the dark. And honestly, it creates this weird balance of power. The Mechanicus needs the Imperium to justify its existence, to protect its interests, to keep the Forge worlds running. But the Imperium needs the Mechanicus even more, to fuel the war machine, to repair its ships, to supply its armies. So both sides look the other way more often than they should. It's a cold war of dogma and desperation, and it's held together by silence. What fascinates me the most is the psychology behind it. The tech priests aren't villains, not really. They genuinely believe that uncovering ancient knowledge is their divine duty, that by reclaiming the wisdom of the past, they're saving humanity. But in doing so, they ignore the consequences. They'll unearth a buried AI, call it a machine saint, and hook it up to a defense grid, only to watch it gain sentience and start converting servitors into drones. And when it happens, they'll call it a test of faith, not a mistake. There's a term some in the lore use, the sin of curiosity. It's the idea that wanting to know too much is a spiritual flaw, that to ask certain questions is to stray from the divine path. And yet, the entire Mechanicus is built on curiosity. They just package it in ritual, bind it in scripture, and pretend it's safe. But deep down, they want to know. And that desire? That's what makes them dangerous. Some fans even believe that the Mechanicus might one day trigger the Imperium's final collapse, that they'll awaken something too ancient, too powerful, too alien. And when that day comes, no amount of incense or binary canticles will be able to save us. And honestly, I think they'd still call it a success, because in the ashes of the galaxy, there'd be one more piece of lost knowledge found, one more fragment of the divine reclaimed. And for them, that's worth everything. One of the most striking and honestly unsettling things about the Adeptus Mechanicus is how little of them is still human. You'll look at a tech priest and maybe catch a glimpse of pale flesh beneath the robes, but most of the time, it's all metal, tubes, blinking lights, and whirring servos. Their faces are often masks, either literal ones of polished brass or worse, surgical replacements bolted to skulls that haven't had a human expression in decades. And the reason behind this transformation goes way beyond utility. It's not just about being more efficient or durable. For the followers of the machine god, the act of replacing the flesh is spiritual. It's salvation. At the core of their belief system is a simple truth. The flesh is weak. It breaks, it decays, it feels pain, it desires. And to the Mechanicus, all of that is not only inconvenient, it's heretical. Emotions, sensations, aging, these are seen as flaws, remnants of an imperfect biological design that must be purged. Every time a tech priest cuts away a piece of their body to replace it with a mechanical part, They believe they're taking one step closer to the machine god, one step away from the chaos of organic existence and toward perfect, logical order. This is where the idea of transhumanism becomes more than just theory. In most sci-fi settings, transhumanism is about evolving humanity to survive, to explore, to transcend our limits. But with the Mechanicus, it's different. They don't want to evolve humanity. They want to erase it, or at least reshape it into something else entirely. They aren't searching for immortality through enhancement. They're trying to achieve divinity through eradication of the self. To be truly holy, in their eyes, is to abandon every part of yourself that feels hunger, love, regret, or joy. And it changes the way they think. The more a tech priest replaces, the less they resemble us, not just physically, but mentally. They start thinking in binary logic, abandoning metaphor, nuance, or empathy. Decision-making becomes a matter of efficiency, probability, and sacred code. Emotions aren't repressed, they're deleted. Joy becomes unnecessary. Grief is a corrupted file. Guilt is a subroutine malfunction. That's why they can watch a factory accident vaporize 100 workers and respond by recalculating output ratios instead of mourning. It's not cruelty, it's just the machine way. Now, not every tech priest goes full metal immediately. Some begin with small augmentations, a cybernetic hand, enhanced vision, a data jack implanted into the spine. But it never stops there. The logic of their faith demands progress. If the Omnissiah is perfection, and the machine is his image, then to remain flesh is to cling to imperfection. That pressure, religious, social, philosophical, drives them deeper down the spiral. You either keep upgrading or you stagnate. And stagnation, in Mechanicus culture, is a form of spiritual death. There's a fan theory I've always found compelling, that tech priests don't actually stop feeling emotion, they just forget what it means to interpret it. A servo skull might remind them of a lost friend, but instead of grief, it triggers a data link loop that sends them back into their work, like echoes of emotion reverberating through circuits that were never designed to hold them. It's haunting when you think about it. Somewhere in that sea of logic, there might still be a person screaming to be remembered, but their voice is too small to be heard over the hum of machinery. And then there are the truly extreme cases. Some magi transform into things that barely resemble humanoid forms. Massive floating constructs with no legs, just anti-grav systems and 100 mechadendrites swaying like metallic tentacles. Others become living data centers, with so much neural enhancement that their thoughts run in parallel, simultaneously calculating, praying, and observing. These aren't exaggerations, they exist, and they lead. Some even become fused into the architecture of their forge worlds, connected to the planet's cogitator networks like neural roots in a digital forest. But not all tech priests take the same path. There are subtle philosophical divides within the Mechanicus itself. Some believe in complete eradication of the self, total replacement of flesh with sacred circuitry. Others advocate for a more balanced form, maintaining minimal organic structure to preserve what they call the human interface. These debates aren't just theoretical, they're religious schisms. Wars have been fought over how much flesh is too much. There's a splinter faction, for example, known as the biologists, who argue that understanding and improving organic systems is just as divine as enhancing machines. Needless to say, they're not very popular on Mars. The question of identity comes up a lot in these discussions. Are tech priests still human, or are they something else entirely? Personally, I think the answer depends on how far they've gone. Some still cling to names, memories, the illusion of personality. Others have been running on subroutines for centuries, their original selves long since overwritten. And in some tragic cases, you get what fans call cog ghosts, tech priests so ancient and modified that they exist as echoes of fragmented code, repeating the same phrases or movements endlessly, no longer aware of the world around them. Their minds are like broken hard drives, glitching through eternity. There's something poetic and horrifying about it. The very thing that gives them power, the ability to surpass the limits of flesh, is also what takes away their soul, piece by piece. And the worst part is, they want it that way. They see it as ascension, a liberation from pain, from fear, from everything that makes us fragile. But fragility is also what makes us human. It's what gives meaning to our choices, our connections, our stories. In the end, that's what makes the Adeptus Mechanicus so fascinating and so tragic. They've built a society where becoming less human is the highest virtue, where emotion is a glitch and empathy is a liability. And they don't see it as loss, they see it as the path to truth, to purity, to the divine. Maybe they're right, or maybe they've just built a perfect machine to forget who they were. Either way, once you go down that road, there's no turning back. Only steel ahead. When most people think about the military might of the Imperium, they picture the Space Marines, those towering demigods in power armor, or maybe the endless ranks of the Astra Militarum, marching to their deaths in the name of the Emperor. But the Adeptus Mechanicus? They're something else entirely. Their armies don't just fight, they function. They deploy like an algorithm, optimized for efficiency, resilience, and absolute obedience. There's no glory, no heroism, just precision. Cold, calculated force deployed in the name of knowledge, acquisition, and sacred purpose. And believe me, that makes them even more terrifying. At the front lines, you'll usually find the Skitarii. These aren't your typical infantry. They're transhuman shock troops, part man, part machine, programmed for war. What's eerie about them is that most of the time, they aren't even in control of themselves. Their thoughts, reactions, targeting systems, all of it can be remotely accessed and directed by their tech priest masters. A Skitarius doesn't decide to charge, it executes a directive. And if it dies in the process, good. Data will be gathered, patterns analyzed, improvements made. They wear armor that bristles with sensory arrays, carry weapons that are almost alive with machine spirits, and march without fear because their fear has been removed. I once read a fan description that stuck with me. They're meat puppets with copper nerves and blind faith. Chilling, but accurate. Then you've got the Cataphren battle servitors, and oh boy, these things are nightmares. They're not soldiers, they're platforms, rolling tanks of muscle, metal, and violence. Originally they were humans, but now they're more like mobile gun emplacements with just enough brain activity left to follow basic commands. Some have plasma cannons bolted to their arms, others carry grav weapons that crush enemies under the sheer weight of forced gravity. You don't send Cataphrons into a battle to win tactically. You send them in to break things. Infrastructure, morale, whatever's in their path. And the worst part? They feel nothing. No rage, no fear, no pain. Just mission parameters and target acquisition. But the real stars of the show, the ones that make even Astartes take notice, are the Castellan robots. These aren't just machines, they're ancient relics from the dark age of technology, barely understood even by the tech priests who command them. And that's what makes them so dangerous. They operate off programmable protocols, written in literal punch cards, and once those orders are slotted in, they will not stop. You can't reason with them, you can't distract them, you can't jam them. They just keep marching forward, laying down firepower that rivals a tank battalion. Twin phosphor blasters, shoulder-mounted flamers, power fists the size of car doors. And when you see them wading through enemy lines like walking statues, glowing eyes burning behind expressionless masks, it's like watching inevitability take form. Of course, none of this happens without direction. Every Mechanicus force is accompanied by tech priests of various ranks, and they're not just backline commanders, they're battlefield conductors. They manage data feeds, bless machine spirits mid-combat, reroute command chains, and sometimes directly plug into their soldiers. It's not rare to see a Dominus surrounded by Skitarii moving in perfect sync, reacting faster than any human general could command. Because they're not being commanded, they're being calculated. And then there's something most people forget. The Mechanicus doesn't just fight for survival, they fight for acquisition. Every war zone is a potential dig site. Every fallen city might hide ancient tech. So when the Adeptus Mechanicus shows up to a conflict, they don't just bring troops, they bring excavation crews, containment teams, and entire data processing convoys. Their armies are part military, part research operation. They'll bomb a city flat and have drones cataloging the rubble before the fires die out. To them, war isn't a tragedy, it's logistics. Fans sometimes debate whether the Mechanicus is more dangerous as a military force or as a political one. And honestly, it's both, because they have something most of the Imperium's armies don't: self-sufficiency. Forge worlds don't rely on outside supply lines, they are the supply lines. They can manufacture weapons, armor, vehicles, even troops, all in-house. That's what gives them their terrifying persistence. You can destroy a Mechanicus battalion, but the Forge World will build 10 more before the year is out, with better programming and maybe a few extra guns. Let's also not forget their specialty units. Electro-priests, for example. These are zealots who channel raw electromagnetic energy through their bodies. Some of them walk into battle surrounded by lightning, short-circuiting enemy armor with a touch. Others march in silence, only to explode in violent arcs of plasma the moment they reach enemy lines. They're unstable, yes, but incredibly effective. Then there's the Sicarian infiltrators and ruststalkers, fast-moving, almost surgical units built for disruption. They don't just kill, they erase. Targeted strikes against command structures, psychic nodes, or heavy weapon emplacements. Precision backed by fanatical devotion and cybernetic enhancements. And we haven't even touched on the real heavy hitters, the knights. While technically aligned with their own households, many Night Worlds are bound to the Mechanicus through ancient pacts. When deployed, these towering war engines bring city-flattening firepower and battlefield presence that rivals even Titans. A single knight accompanied by a Mechanicus cohort can change the tide of war, not just through force, but through fear. Because when you see a knight stride into the field, red armor gleaming with sacred glyphs, flanked by Skitari and Cataphrons chanting in binaric harmony, you know the machine god has arrived. They even record all of this. Each battle, each kill, each loss. It's all logged into the books of war, massive cogitator archives that span centuries. Every tactic, every maneuver, every anomaly, it's data. And that data is sacred, used to refine strategies, improve designs, purge flaws. For the Mechanicus, war isn't just blood and fire, it's learning. Every battlefield is a lab, every corpse a report. In the end, that's what makes the military might of the Adeptus Mechanicus so terrifying. It's not passion, it's not loyalty, it's not even survival. It's function, it's optimization. It's a war machine run by priests who believe that death is just another data point on the path to divinity. And when you stand in their way, you're not fighting soldiers. You're facing an equation, one designed to erase you with maximum efficiency. If the Adeptus Mechanicus is the beating heart of the Imperium's technological soul, then Forge Worlds are its arteries, pumping steel, fire, and sacred data through the veins of a dying galaxy. These aren't just planets, they're living machines. Entire worlds converted into vast industrial complexes where the land has been flayed and reshaped to serve a singular purpose: production. There's no countryside, no oceans, no untouched wilderness. Just layers upon layers of factories, assembly lines, refineries, and foundries stacked so high that they blot out the sky. Walking across a forge world is like walking through a cathedral made of smoke and pistons. Towering stacks belch black clouds into the stratosphere. Great crucibles of molten metal pour endlessly into shaping molds. Cogitator towers rise like obelisks, covered in data ports and enshrined in purity seals. And in every direction, there's movement. Servitors marching in programmed unison, Skitari patrols scanning for inefficiencies, and conveyor systems carrying raw materials across entire continents. The atmosphere is thick with chemicals and praise. Machines don't just operate here, they are worshipped. The most iconic Forge world is, of course, Mars. The birthplace of the cult Mechanicus, it still serves as the spiritual and political center of their domain. But Mars is just one node in a massive, interconnected web of industrial power. Every Forge world is different in design and temperament, but all of them share the same core structure: relentless manufacturing capability, hierarchical tech priest governance, and absolute loyalty to the machine god. Some specialize in weaponry, others in void ship construction, some in cybernetics or bioengineering. Together, they form the backbone of the Imperium's military-industrial complex. That's the real secret of the Imperium's survival. Not just faith or manpower, but the ability to mass-produce war. Without Forge worlds, the Astra Militarum would have no tanks. The Astartes would have no bolters. Even the Inquisition would struggle to outfit their agents. Every lasgun, every flak vest, every ration pack, it all starts in the heat-choked depths of a Forge world. These places don't sleep. Their factories run on 25-hour cycles. Their workers don't have shifts. They are shifts, rotated and replaced like parts in a machine. Entire generations are born, live, and die beneath conveyor belts without ever seeing sunlight. And that's not just dramatic imagery. It's their reality. People aren't citizens on a forge world. They're resources. The Mechanicus doesn't see the population as individuals. They're components. Biological elements necessary for a larger system to function. That's why servitorization is so common. Efficiency is the prime directive. If you can't serve with your hands, they'll rewire your brain and make sure you serve with your spine instead. There's a cold pragmatism to it, sure, but also a brutal kind of clarity. No one questions their role. They're part of something larger, something divine. What's fascinating is how each forge world develops its own rituals, subcultures, and even dialects of binaric cant. A reactor blessing on Ryza might be considered offensive on Metallica. A mechadendrite calibration performed one way on Graia could be heretical on Styges 8. It creates this intricate web of local traditions layered over a shared faith, like regional sects within a massive religion. And sometimes those differences lead to real conflict. There have been wars between forge worlds, silent ones fought through sabotage, resource denial, or whispered heresies. Because power, even in the name of the Omnissiah, always breeds rivalry. Fans often speculate on just how much control the High Lords of Terra really have over these worlds. Technically, forge worlds are part of the Imperium, but in practice, they're semi-autonomous, bound more by ancient oaths than by any centralized government. When the Imperium calls for weapons, the Mechanicus decides whether to answer. And if they do, they expect payment, usually in the form of tithes, territory, or exclusive salvage rights. It's transactional, not patriotic. Forge worlds serve the Imperium not out of loyalty, but because it maintains the infrastructure that allows their work to continue. Some theories even suggest that the Adeptus Mechanicus is slowly building a hidden empire within the Imperium, one forge world at a time. That through control of logistics, supply chains, and repair networks, they've effectively ensured that the Imperium cannot function without them. And honestly, it's not that hard to believe. Who else could rearm a crusade fleet in 3 days? Who else can produce titans, knights, and plasma weaponry in bulk? The Mechanicus isn't just powerful. They're indispensable. But there's also a sense of rot beneath all that steel. Some forge worlds have become so choked with pollution that even servitors struggle to operate. Whole sections of planetary crust have collapsed from centuries of overmining. And yet, the forges burn on. Because halting production is blasphemy. Efficiency must be maintained, the quota must be met. Even if the world itself is dying, its spirit must be kept alive through machinery. It's a tragic cycle, devotion turned to decay. What strikes me most is how impersonal it all is. The same planet that forged a weapon that saves a guardsman's life also produces the chains that bind a heretic in a black ship's brig. There's no moral judgment, no good or evil, just output. Forge worlds don't care what their weapons are used for, only that they were blessed, assembled, and delivered on time. It's not heartless, it's something deeper. A worldview where intention is irrelevant and only function matters. And yet there's beauty in it too. A grim, metallic beauty. The idea that somewhere out there, beneath rusted towers and burning skies, a single tech priest is tuning a reactor that will power a titan destined to save a world. Or doom one. That duality, that tension between sanctity and horror, is what makes Forge Worlds such a compelling piece of the setting. They are both the hope and the doom of mankind, wrapped in the same sacred cog. There's something no one likes to admit about the Adeptus Mechanicus. For all their chants and rituals, all their proclamations of purity and devotion, they've always had a darker side. A hidden world beneath the cog and flame where the pursuit of knowledge goes too far and faith mutates into obsession. It's not in the sermons or the holy data vaults. It's in the places they don't talk about, the sealed labs beneath Forge Worlds, the black archives buried beneath Martian crust, the projects so ancient and cursed that even the Inquisition can't access them. This is where the Mechanicus stops being mysterious and starts being terrifying. Let's start with one of the biggest taboos in the galaxy, the Necrons. The irony writes itself. The Adeptus Mechanicus, who worship the machine god, are obsessed with ancient godlike beings who are machines, and they've known about them for longer than they let on. Some high-ranking magi, especially those tied to exploratory fleets or fringe forge worlds like Styges 8, have made quiet, unsettling contact with Necron tech, or worse, with the Necrons themselves. And instead of recoiling in horror, some tried to learn. You can't really blame them. The Necron race is built on technology that's incomprehensibly advanced. Matter manipulation, dimensional phasing, self-repairing alloys that respond to thought. To the Mechanicus, it's not heresy, it's temptation incarnate. One of the most whispered about projects is the so-called Satan Initiative, a term fans use to describe rumored experiments where Mechanicus scientists allegedly tried to interface with Khitan shards, those fractured remnants of star gods the Necrons once worshipped and then enslaved. There's no official record of such a project, obviously, but stories persist, of shards being locked in containment fields beneath forge worlds, studied not with fear, but with reverence. Some believe these shards are seen by certain cults within the Mechanicus not as threats, but as divine echoes of the machine god himself. The overlap is almost too perfect, and that's what makes it so dangerous. And then there's Mars. Beautiful, sacred Mars, the beating heart of the Mechanicus, yes, but also a crypt. Beneath its surface lie vaults so ancient that even the Emperor himself likely never dared to open them. The Noctis Labyrinth. Just the name sends chills down your spine. It's more than a vault. It's a labyrinthine complex of sealed-off ruins and technologies that predate the Imperium by thousands, maybe even millions of years. Most of the time, it's just a place whispered about in binary prayers and denied in official reports. But those who've seen deeper know better. Something sleeps down there. Or worse, waits. Some fan theories claim that the Noctis Labyrinth houses the Dragon of Mars, a Tan entity known as the Void Dragon. According to ancient lore, this being was defeated by the Emperor himself and imprisoned beneath the Martian crust before the rise of the Imperium. If it's true, then everything the Mechanicus has built, their religion, their rituals, their entire belief system, might not be a coincidence. It might be influence, a god machine whispering into the dreams of the red-robed faithful, nudging them toward a future it can control. Think about that for a second. What if the machine god they revere isn't just metaphor? What if it's real and monstrously ancient? An artificial intelligence, don't get me started. The Mechanicus officially bans the creation of true AI. They call it abominable intelligence, a sin against the Omnissiah. But every time you scratch the surface, you find evidence that some of them are still trying. Experimental constructs that think faster than a human ever could. Decision matrices that predict the flow of battles before they begin. Networks that evolve and rewrite their own code. These aren't just tools. These are minds. And the scariest part, some of them might be old. Leftovers from the dark age of technology, rebooted by magi who thought they could handle it. They couldn't. There are rumors, always rumors, about data ghosts in Mechanicus archives. Programs that answer before a question is asked. Machines that operate when no one has activated them. Sealed vaults that request passwords from languages no one speaks anymore. Some say these are echoes of the Men of Iron, the AI that nearly ended humanity the first time around. Others believe there's something new, something being built in secret, on hidden forge worlds far from prying eyes. It's hard to say which possibility is worse. But it's not all Necrons and AI. The Mechanicus also dabbles in things that blur the line between science and sorcery. They study Xenos artifacts, sometimes even binding warp entities into machinery. There's a type of experimentation called techno-neuromancy, where neural data is extracted from psychers and used to guide machine spirits. The line between soul and code starts to blur. And once you're in that territory, you're not just risking mechanical failure, you're risking demonic possession. And still, they press forward, because the data must be gathered. The experiment must be run. Fans debate endlessly whether these experiments are sanctioned or if the higher echelons of the Mechanicus are just turning a blind eye. Some believe there's an entire branch of the organization dedicated to keeping these secrets contained, an inner circle of magi tasked not with discovery but containment. Others think the truth is even darker, that the Mechanicus wants these secrets to spread, that every forged world might be a test chamber, that we're all just variables in a grand experiment being run by minds that no longer think like us. What makes it all so chilling is the quiet, the silence that surrounds these projects. You won't find sermons or manifestos celebrating them, just sealed data vaults, erased names, and records wiped clean by auto-purgation protocols. And every once in a while, a Forge world goes dark. No transmissions, no distress calls, just silence. Until, maybe months later, a new fleet emerges, sleeker, faster, armed with weapons that don't match any known pattern, and no one asks where they came from. Because no one wants to know. In the end, that's what makes the dark heart of the Mechanicus so compelling. They're not villains in the traditional sense. They don't do this out of cruelty or hunger for power. They do it because they must know. Because to them, knowledge isn't just power. It's worship, it's purpose. And if that pursuit drags them into madness, into the jaws of ancient gods, or the circuits of rogue intelligences, so be it. They'll chant their rites, they'll log their data, and they'll open the next vault anyway. So after diving deep into the machine choirs, rusted altars, and binary psalms of the Adeptus Mechanicus, we're left with a question that doesn't have a clean answer. What are they, really? Are they the saviors of humanity, keeping the Imperium's rotting carcass limping forward with sacred industry and relentless faith? Or are they the architects of its doom, blinded by dogma, worshipping machines they no longer understand, and playing with forces they should have left buried? Honestly? Maybe they're both, and maybe that's the most Warhammer answer possible. There's no denying that the Imperium wouldn't last a single generation without the Mechanicus. They build the Titans, the ships, the lasguns, the Vox units, the plasma reactors, the power armor. Without them, the galaxy-spanning bureaucracy of the Imperium collapses under its own weight. Every battle fought, every world reclaimed, every crusade launched, it all leans on the shoulders of a Forge world somewhere, grinding away day and night to meet impossible quotas. We love to call the Imperium a theocratic dystopia, and it is. But the Mechanicus is the beating steel heart that keeps it alive, even if that heart pumps toxic fumes instead of blood. But there's something deeper and sadder about them too. Something tragic. These aren't people who chose to become fanatics. Most tech priests started as curious minds, engineers, thinkers, people who wanted to understand the universe. But in a galaxy this hostile, that pure curiosity gets twisted. Faith becomes armor. Ritual becomes a firewall. And over time, knowledge stops being a goal and becomes a cage. They don't innovate because they're not allowed to. They don't question because they're taught not to. And the most devoted of them, those high-ranking magi fused into the walls of data vaults or floating like gods above the forge fires, they don't even remember what it was like to feel curious in the first place. That's what haunts me about them. They don't think they're doing anything wrong. They genuinely believe they're preserving the last light of human knowledge in a galaxy drowning in darkness. And maybe they are, but they're doing it in a way that slowly strips away the very thing they claim to protect: humanity itself. The warmth, the creativity, the defiance. They replace it all with function and formula until the person that was becomes just another node in the network. It's efficient, it's stable, but it's not living. There's also a quiet fear that runs through Mechanicus lore, unspoken but always present, that one day they'll go too far, that they'll uncover something they can't control, that they'll awaken the wrong shard, reboot the wrong AI, or plug a data soul into a device that was never meant to be touched. And when that happens, the Emperor won't save us. The Imperial Guard won't stop it. Even the Space Marines might be powerless, because when the Mechanicus makes a mistake, it's not just a tactical error. It's a galactic event, and they won't even call it a failure. They'll call it progress. I've seen fans argue for hours online about whether the Mechanicus should be reformed, whether someone like Belisarius Cawl represents hope or just another branch of controlled madness. Some see him as a visionary, others see him as a dangerous outlier, one failed experiment away from becoming the next Men of Iron crisis. But the fact that he exists at all says something, that maybe, just maybe, change is possible. That maybe the steel curtain of tradition is finally beginning to crack. Still, every time I see a tech priest on the battlefield, surrounded by Skitarii chanting to a weapon older than the Crusades, I wonder, is this humanity's greatest triumph? Or is it a sign that we've forgotten who we were? The Mechanicus keeps the lights on, but at what cost? Can a civilization still claim to be alive if it's run entirely by machines, maintained by minds that no longer dream, and worshipped by people who've replaced hope with hex code? Maybe the truth is, we need them. And maybe they need us too. Because for all their cold logic and sacred circuitry, they still depend on the Imperium's flesh and blood reality. They still need soldiers to hold the line, inquisitors to keep chaos at bay, psychers to light the Astronomicon. And maybe that's the balance: faith and function, machine and man, fear and knowledge, somehow holding together just long enough to survive another millennium. But if there's one thing I know for sure, it's that the Adeptus Mechanicus isn't going anywhere. They'll be there in every war, every corner of the galaxy, rebuilding, repairing, repurposing, watching, waiting. And behind every gleaming servo skull and flickering data slate, there's a prayer being whispered, not to a god of mercy, but to a god of order. One that listens in code and answers in silence. If this deep dive into the red-robed priesthood of Mars left you just as fascinated and unsettled as it did me, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. There's so much more to explore in the grimdark galaxy, from secret histories to forbidden cults to the madness lurking just beneath the surface. Because in Warhammer 40k, the question is never just, what do they do? It's always, what did they sacrifice to do it? And trust me, the Mechanicus has sacrificed more than we'll ever truly know. One of the strangest things about the Adeptus Mechanicus is that, for all their supposed mastery of technology, they often don't understand the things they build. That's not an insult. It's just the way their culture works. Understanding isn't the goal. Faithful replication is. If a tech priest comes across a schematic from the dark age of technology, they won't dissect it, experiment with it, or look for ways to improve it. They'll enshrine it, chant over it, and follow its instructions with religious precision, even if they don't fully grasp what it does. In a weird way, it's like watching someone pray over IKEA instructions written in an extinct language, then building a nuclear reactor from it, one part at a time, because that's what the paper says. It creates this bizarre duality within the Mechanicus. On the surface, they're the most technologically advanced organization in the Imperium. They build the Titans, the warships, the plasma weaponry. But under that gleaming surface, there's a constant thread of uncertainty. Half of their knowledge is half-truths, recovered fragments, corrupted files patched together with incense and ritual. They talk about divine purpose and blessed data. But the truth is, a lot of what they do relies on trial, error, and a whole lot of blind faith. That's where things get interesting. Because not every tech priest is content with just following the litany. There are those, quietly, carefully, who begin to ask questions. Why does this reactor produce twice as much energy when we speak this particular prayer? What happens if we don't anoint this circuit with sacred oils? Why do machine spirits behave differently depending on the moon phase and background radiation? And it's not that they want to be heretics. They just want to know. But in the cult Mechanicus, that kind of thinking is dangerous. It walks too close to innovation, too close to the sin of curiosity. Some fans refer to these types as the silent thinkers, tech priests who still perform the rituals, still chant the binary litanies, but who also keep their own data logs, who run simulations when no one's watching, who maintain a second layer of thought beneath the programmed surface. It's a lonely, terrifying way to live, knowing that if you're ever discovered, you'll be denounced, scrapped, or worse, turned into a servitor. But these are the ones who push the boundaries of what's possible. Sometimes for the better, sometimes not. It makes you wonder just how much the Mechanicus is hiding from itself. How much of its own doctrine is built not on truth, but on fear. Fear of what happened the last time humanity pushed too far too fast. The Men of Iron, the AI rebellions, the loss of entire solar systems in the blink of an eye. Maybe their rituals aren't just superstition. Maybe they're containment, warding signs and sacred oils and prayer-encoded protocols. Maybe those aren't just for show. Maybe they're what's keeping the Imperium from waking up something far worse than ignorance. There's a grim beauty in how they function. Every tech priest is both priest and scientist. Every action is both function and faith. They might spend months preparing a new Forge Temple reactor, not because it takes that long, but because the rituals must be perfect. Every servo skull has its own blessings, Every cogwheel must be aligned with the sacred symmetry. If something malfunctions, it's not seen as a mechanical issue, it's a spiritual imbalance. And they'll treat it as such, with chants, smoke, and diagnostic rites that blur the line between repair and exorcism. And somehow it works. That's the maddest part. Their machines do function, their weapons do fire, their titans do walk. For all their superstition, the Mechanicus holds together an empire that should have collapsed 10,000 years ago. It makes you think, maybe there's more to this machine worship than just ritual. Maybe, just maybe, there is a kind of spirit in the machine. Not a soul, per se, but an echo. A presence. Something ancient and resonant that responds not to logic, but to belief. Some fans even argue that the very warp, the psychic dimension that shapes reality through emotion and thought, might be what gives their rituals power. That belief isn't just a placebo in Warhammer, it's a force. A tech priest believes the machine needs to be blessed so it functions better when it is. 1,000 voices whispering a prayer to a reactor might create enough psychic resonance to actually stabilize it. In any other setting, it would sound absurd. In the 41st millennium, it makes disturbing sense. That's the tension that keeps me coming back to the Mechanicus. They're not just mechanics in red robes, they're walking contradictions, rational fanatics. Superstitious scientists, cybernetic monks trying to decode the divine by disassembling it. And in that contradiction, there's something deeply human, more human even, than many of their flesh and blood counterparts across the Imperium. Because at the end of the day, they're doing what humans have always done when faced with the vast, the unknowable, the terrifying. They make sense of it through faith, through ritual, through a system that gives the illusion of control, even when the wires are fraying. So next time you see a priest swinging incense over a data console or whispering prayers into a servoskull's ear, don't laugh, don't roll your eyes. Because somewhere in that ritual, beneath the superstition, the screeching binaric, the dripping oil and burning incense, there's a spark of understanding, a spark of something else. And maybe, just maybe, that spark is the only thing standing between us and the void. If that thought hits you the way it hits me, you already know you're in the right place. Stick around, there's always more to uncover. If you've made it this far, then you're clearly one of us. Someone who loves peeling back the layers of the grimdark, digging through the ash and metal to find the strange, broken humanity underneath it all. So if this dive into the red-robed enigma of the Adeptus Mechanicus sparks something in you, hit that subscribe button, give the video a like, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell me your favorite theory, your wildest headcanon, or just which Forge world you'd want to serve on. We've only just begun exploring the mysteries of the 41st millennium, and trust me, the Machine God has many more secrets to share.